Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What is Rotary International? How are Rotary International, the United Nations Children's Fund, the UN World Health Organization, and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control coordinating to help eradicate the scourge of polio from the face of the earth? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other hot-button issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're shining the spotlight on a very unique partnership between Rotary International and several of the United Nations agencies that are working to eliminate the scourge of polio, but also working on adult illiteracy, promoting sustainable development, and a wide range of other activities. My guest today is someone who's very knowledgeable of Rotary International. My guest today is John Hewko. John Hewko is the General Secretary and CEO of Rotary International and the Rotary Foundation, managing one of the world's largest global humanitarian service organizations. From 2004 to 2009, Mr. Hewko was Vice President for Operations and Compact Development for the Millennium Challenge Corporation, a U.S. government agency established to deliver foreign assistance to the world's poorest countries. Prior to joining MCC, Mr. Hewko was an international partner with the law firm Baker & McKenzie, specializing in international corporate transactions in emerging markets. Mr. John Hewko, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Great, Bill. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you being with me, John. Let's start off with a very basic question. A hard one perhaps, but what is Rotary International in a minute or so?
Sure. Well, Rotary International is one of the world's largest and premier global service organizations. We were established in 1905 in Chicago. An attorney, Paul Harris, was the founder of Rotary, and what he really wanted to create was an ability for community leaders, whether they be in large cities or small cities, to come together in an organization where they can both network professionally and do good in the world. And so, from that first club in Chicago in 1905, within 6 years, Rotary had expanded to 6 continents. San Francisco, New York, Winnipeg, Canada. And as I said, we were in 6 continents by 1921. And today we have over 1.2 million members in over 200 geographic locations around the world. And we truly are a bit like the UN. 70% of our members are outside of North America. So what we are today is one of the world's leading global humanitarian organizations, tackling issues, huge humanitarian global issues such as maternal and child health, water and sanitation, literacy, and things like that. Our largest program is the eradication of polio. It's a program that we started in 1985 with the goal of ending polio, something that's ending a disease that's only happened once before in the history of mankind with smallpox. Rotarians have contributed about $1.2 billion to the effort so far, and countless volunteer hours. We've been able to vaccinate over 2 billion children in 122 countries.
That's a major, in fact, it's the largest international health program ever undertaken, and we're going to get into that in great detail, but it's a lot of information, and I know our viewers are going to be very interested in Rotary and learning more about it, and they can go to www.rotary.org to get more information, and they can go to www.un.org and work their way through to UNICEF.org or to WHO, the World Health Organization.org, to find out more information. But there's so much out there. It's just incredible how many activities you have underway and how you're working to really build a better world. Well, there's been a tremendous amount of coordination and cooperation between Rotary and the United Nations. And of course, we remember the UN was formed in 1945. But that cooperation really went back prior to 1945 when many Rotarians, I guess 51 Rotarians, met in San Francisco to help set up the United Nations. But it really goes back even to conferences in London and in Havana, Cuba, does it not?
Yeah, in 1942, I mean, as you said, our relationship goes back a long way, Rotary's relationship with the United Nations. In 1942, Rotarians from 21 nations convened a conference in London where they invited ministers of education and other observers really to talk about how to promote education, science, and culture throughout the world. And that meeting, that conference really led to the eventual creation of UNESCO. In 1945, 49 Rotarians and 29 delegations were very active in drafting the Charter of the United Nations, and five Rotarians have been presidents of the UN General Assembly. So our roots are very, very deep and very strong with the United Nations.
And given there have only been about 66 presidents, or 67 now, that's quite a feat. Certainly is.
Right.
Well, in 1995, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, Rotary did an excellent documentary on this unique partnership between the two organizations. And what we're going to do, John, is go to the video and watch that, and we'll come back and we'll talk about it. But let's go to the video.
Terrific. Look forward to it.
There were many who doubted that agreement could ever be reached by these 50 countries, differing so much in race and religion, language and culture. But these differences were all forgotten in one unshakable unity of determination to find a way to end war.
With those sentiments, U.S. President Harry S. Truman and other leaders from around the world founded the United Nations. Its purposes: to maintain international peace and security, to develop friendly relations among nations, to help solve global economic and social problems, and to promote human rights. And it's no coincidence that some of these purposes find their roots in Rotary. Nearly 50 Rotarians served as delegates, advisors, and consultants at the historic gathering. The invitation to take part in the Charter Conference was a clear recognition of Rotary's early prominence in efforts to advance understanding, goodwill, and peace around the globe.
Well, John, I think that video shows quite vividly a very unique partnership that Rotary and the UN had in the early days of the founding of the United Nations. And of course, that has carried over really for the last 67 years or so, even though during the Cold War there wasn't quite as much involvement, because a lot of the Cold War was fought in the Security Council on the floor of the General Assembly at the UN. But still, it's a very unique partnership, and it seems to be one that's very beneficial to both organizations, is it not?
No, it really is, Bill. In 1985, Rotary launched its Polioplus effort with the goal of eradicating polio. And in 1988, we partnered with the World Health Organization and UNICEF and other partners to create the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. We've had an excellent working relationship with those two organizations, and we've eliminated 99% of polio in the world. And we really are very, very close to eradicating this terrible disease. But in addition to that, Rotary in 1997 began expanding its representation at a whole slew of international organizations: the Food and Agricultural Organization, the Organization of African Unity, the World Bank, the Organization of American States, the World Food Program. So we're very, very engaged with the UN, and through the years, through our publications, we've also supported the UN and promoted many of the initiatives that UN has been undertaking.
So often when I think of Rotary International and the UN, well, first off, the UN was set up to eliminate the three goals: to eliminate the scourge of war, to promote economic and social development, and to enhance human rights around the world. And when I think of the fourth object of Rotary, to promote international world peace, cooperation, and understanding, seems like there's a close parallel between those goals as far as working towards similar goals and also with similar programs.
Absolutely. We have, for example, in Rotary, a whole series of peace centers. We fund over 100 scholars every year to do postgraduate work at 7 universities around the world in the area of peace and conflict resolution. Our motto of the organization is service above self. So through our various humanitarian programs in areas, as I mentioned, such as maternal and child health, water and sanitation, basic education and literacy, we work hand in glove with many of the same goals that the United Nations is trying to achieve.
Now, we're talking about Rotary International. We mentioned the Rotary.org website, but I'm sure many of our viewers are watching this saying, well, I may know a Rotarian, or gee, maybe I'd like to be a Rotarian. How does one become a Rotarian?
Well, again, you start with the website and identify where the nearest Rotary Club is in your community, and then reach out to the club, get to know the club a little bit better, and we'd love to be able to talk to you and to bring you on board as a Rotarian.
And there are 34,000 Rotary clubs around the world in around 200 countries and territories. So there's a wide range of opportunity for people who would want to be involved in Rotary and just about any community in any place in the world.
Absolutely. We're everywhere. We're both local and global at the same time. That's the beauty of our organization. We have deep community roots, yet we have this enormous global network where we're able to take on large global projects such as polio, but at the same time address a myriad of humanitarian and service issues in the local community.
Now, you're in New York this year for Rotary Day at the United Nations. This is an annual event. It's usually in November, but you're up in New York for that. And this is where you bring Rotary leaders from around the world and also UN leaders together and focus on some of these projects and talk about maybe what they're doing now and what they could do in the future. Is that the main goal of Rotary Day at the UN?
Yeah, it's to really try to expand our thinking in terms of how can we take this enormous platform that we have of 1.2 million professionals around the world, and to continue to do good and to be innovative and think about new ways to move forward. As you know, Bill, the buzzword now in the humanitarian development space is partnership. How can you take 1 + 1 and make it 3? And it's really through our partnerships with organizations such as the UN, with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with WHO, with UNICEF, and others, we've really been able to take our strengths, partner with other organizations and leverage their strengths really to make 1 + 1 = 3 or 4 or 5, if possible.
And those partnerships are extremely important. Do you find, John, that you look for partnerships? Well, you mentioned the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with the United Nations agencies, and I know you have memoranda of understanding with the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization with a wide range of UN agencies, but do you team up with other service groups such as Lions International, which is also a very large service organization, Kiwanis? Do you work on projects with them?
Well, what we have is we have a whole series of strategic partnerships that we've entered into. For example, with the Aga Khan University, we have an arrangement with them where we are supporting the training of nurses in Uganda, Tanzania, and in East Africa. We have a microfinance program with Hewko Credit. We have a very strong relationship with Mercy Ships. So we're always looking for ways in which we can leverage our strengths with strengths of other organizations in order to multiply the good that we can do around the world.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The views expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'll be back in just a moment after this important message. Welcome back to our program. Today we're focusing attention on the really unique partnership between Rotary International and several United Nations agencies such as UN Children's Fund and the World Health Organization, and talking about what they're doing to work collectively to eliminate the scourge of polio, as well as to accomplish a lot of other very positive goals. And my guest is someone who's very knowledgeable of Rotary International. John Hewko is the General Secretary and CEO of Rotary International and the Rotary Foundation, managing one of the world's largest global humanitarian service organizations. Mr. Hewko, from 2004 to 2009, was Vice President for Operations and Compact Development for the Millennium Challenge Corporation, a U.S. government agency established in 2004 to deliver foreign assistance to the world's poorest countries. John, we're talking about Rotary International, a truly unique organization that Paul Harris set up in 1905. You have 1.2 million members and over 34,000 clubs, which is a huge operation. As you think about your involvement with the United Nations, there are obviously many UN agencies. Are you in I know you're having Rotary Day at the UN programs and what have you every year to bring the leaders together to talk about what you're doing, how you can perhaps build on those successes, but also talk about future programs. Are there any that you're thinking about at this point that are maybe in the planning stage or that you might like to look at as we look over the horizon?
Well, you know, we have, through our foundation, Rotary has, in addition to Rotary International, we have a foundation that's also based in Evanston, Illinois. And our foundation has sort of 6 key areas of focus that we want to move into. We're already in, and we want to strengthen our activities. You know, maternal and child health, water and sanitation, disease prevention and treatment, literacy and basic education, disease, peace and conflict resolution, and community development. And so those are the 6 areas of focus that Rotary has been very active in, and that we really want to strengthen. So to the extent that we would be looking in the future to strengthen our relationship with not only the UN but other partners, it would probably be in one of those 6 areas of focus. But really, our number one goal now is we need to get polio eradicated. It's our number one challenge. We cannot fail. The world is counting on the initiative to succeed, because success in polio, Bill, will set up the world for the next big global challenge. We will not fail, and we can't fail.
It certainly will, and you certainly can't, and you're just that close. It's very, very close. Well, we have another clip, John, of this close working relationship between Rotary, and also it brings in the Polioplus program, and a fellow that a lot of the people who were watching UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund, a few years ago would know, Jim Grant. But let's go to the video, and we'll come back and talk about it.
Through community and international service, Rotary is involved in solutions to many of the same world problems being dealt with today by the UN. Problems like drug abuse, illiteracy and inadequate education, pollution and environmental degradation, as well as sickness and hunger. Increasingly, Rotary International and the UN are finding opportunities to work together for a greater result than either organization could achieve on its own. Nowhere is this more evident than in the area of polio immunization. Thanks in part to collaboration with the World Health Organization and the United Nations Children's Fund, Rotary's Polioplus program is helping to protect 600 million children in the developing world from the crippling effects of polio.
And I've been in India and Pakistan and El Salvador and Colombia, I can go on, where these immunization programs have been backed by the local Rotarians. The financial support has come from the global effort, but it's been the Rotarians on the ground who have mobilized the sound trucks, gotten the radio and local newspapers to disseminate information and to really back the social mobilization.
In this instance and others, the United Nations benefits from Rotary's ability to mobilize grassroots support. And, as demonstrated recently in former Yugoslavia, Rotarians gain through expanded opportunities to provide service above self. More importantly, people in need receive help, help which might otherwise never arrive. As the 50th anniversary of the United Nations approaches, Rotary International will continue to develop this partnership and through it seek new opportunities for Rotarians to advance service to mankind wherever it is needed.
And John, I think that really sums up a lot of the activities now. I should mention a lot of the people who are looking at this have to remember this was done back in the mid-90s. So this was in honor or to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. And it was a documentary put together by Rotary. But as the former director, past director of the UN Children's Fund, Jim Grant, said, Rotarians are so valuable in many ways, but Rotarians on the ground really make a difference. How does that work? How do the Rotarians on the ground really help to achieve the goals of this Polioplus program?
Well, you know, we really are the boots on the ground. We're the volunteers throughout the world who are active in, one, raising money for the polio effort, and secondly, advocating advocating for more funding to come from a variety of sources. And third, volunteering countless hours in the field, vaccinating children, helping deliver the vaccine throughout the world to ultimately achieve this goal of eradicating doing something that's only happened once before in the history of mankind, and that is eliminating a terrible disease from the face of the earth.
Now Rotarians have National Immunization Days, NIDs they call them. What is a National Immunization Day, and how does that operate?
Well, National Immunization Day is a process whereby both volunteers and health professionals fan out across a given country or region or district and literally go door to door vaccinating children, setting up areas where people can come and get vaccinated. And that again is where Rotary plays a critical role, because we are both a global and a quintessentially local organization. And it's local Rotarians in the countries where we're immunizing the children that are very much engaged, because it's really those local Rotarians that know their country best and are able more effectively to carry out the activities, whether it's in an NID or any other type of humanitarian project that Rotary is undertaking.
And of course, our viewers can go to www.rotary.org to get much more information about what we're talking about today. And if they want more information on the United Nations, they can go to www.un.org. And as you mentioned, the Polioplus program, it is a phenomenal program. Smallpox was a major problem, and in fact, it was the UN World Health Organization that helped eliminate it. It was a campaign that started about 67, I guess, and ran through the early part of the 80s and abolished this horrible disease. But polio is a little more difficult because you have to kill that virus, do you not? Because people cross borders, if they take it with them, the virus doesn't know that it's not supposed to go with them. But that's really a major challenge, isn't it?
It really is. And people in the United States, when you talk to particularly younger people, they say, gee, polio, I thought that disease was long gone, but it still exists in an endemic state in 4 countries around the world. And people need to remember that we are really one plane ride away from having the polio virus easily spread throughout the world. That's why it's very important to get the job done and to eliminate this disease once and for all, because the world has invested $8 billion in polio eradication to date. If we're not successful in this project, in addition to the millions of children that will be affected, perhaps potentially by this disease, you're talking an economic cost of $40 to $50 billion over the next 25 years. So both from a personal suffering perspective, to eliminate the personal suffering that would occur, but also from an economic perspective, it's extremely important that we get the job done.
And that's very, very true. And I remember seeing some statistics a few years ago. It was like once polio is eliminated, there'll be 50,000 children every year who won't die, hundreds of thousands more who won't be afflicted with this horrible disease. They won't have to drag their limbs through the streets or the dust or whatever it may be. The taxpayers of the United States will save over $300 million a year that they don't have to spend in anti-polio programs. The taxpayers of the world will save $1.5 billion. It's a huge investment, and it's certainly worth pursuing, and Rotarians and the United Nations are certainly to be congratulated for moving this program forward. Well, before we run out of time, let's talk about the Rotary Foundation a bit. You do other programs too. Just briefly, what is the Rotary Foundation, and what are some of your other programs in educational or humanitarian areas that you're working on?
The Rotary Foundation is supported largely by donations from Rotarians and other sources. We have 6 areas of focus that we spend our resources on: maternal and child health, disease prevention and treatment, water and sanitation, and 3 others. And it really is the vehicle through which we can provide in-depth services and projects in these areas. It's a phenomenal opportunity, if one wants to support our foundation, to really contribute to improving the lives of people around the world in these 6 areas. And a great example of a project that we're doing. You've got the Rotary Club of Guatemala Sur partnering with a Rotary Club of the United States to deliver water pumps to villages and orphanages in Guatemala. And those sorts of projects, there's many that we're doing in these 6 areas of focus. So if you're interested in contributing and helping the world solve the problems in these areas, the Rotary Foundation is certainly a vehicle that one would want to look to.
And you always encourage your Rotary clubs to partner with another Rotary club, a club in wherever it might be, Florida, partnering with someone in Beijing, or not Beijing, but perhaps La Paz, Bolivia, or someplace like that. So you always want to get that connection between the two clubs?
Absolutely. That's the beauty of Rotary. We're both local, where clubs are doing real work in their local communities. But because we are a global organization, clubs have the ability to link up with other clubs throughout the world and engage in projects. And that, of course, allows, again, leverage to occur. You can then do larger projects when you start getting clubs from different parts of the world linking together and jointly attempting to conquer some of these important global humanitarian issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, as you look in the crystal ball, what do you see as some of the major challenges for Rotary and the UN? I know completing the Polioplus program is important, but are there some others out there that you're looking at that as we move well into the 21st century?
I think one of the challenges in general in the humanitarian sphere and the international development areas is how to better engage the private sector. I think there's a growing recognition that the private sector needs to play a critical role in addressing some of these large humanitarian problems that the world faces. And what is Rotary? Rotary is 1.2 million businessmen and women around the world that are both local and global, attempting to deal with these large humanitarian issues. So our challenge is, how do we take this private sector platform that we have, and what role can we play in this great debate about what are the solutions to the world's problems?
Well, you're certainly dealing with some major problems, and of course the Polioplus program is a tremendous program. But John Hewko, General Secretary for Rotary International, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Terrific. Thank you for having me, Bill. Appreciate
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on today's Global Connections program.